So our second speaker for today is Dr. Bev Sithole from the Aboriginal Research Practitioners Network, who'll be presenting on Future is in our own hands, effective pathways for disaster risk reduction in remote communities in Northern Australia. Welcome, Bev.
Good afternoon. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be here. I will try today to bring together some conversations and ideas and views of people in Central Arnhem Land with whom I have worked on a project supported by the BNHCRC called Building Strong ER Institutions in Remote Communities in Northern Australia. This project is led by Professor Jeremy Russell-Smith. Unfortunately for us, and it's very sad and painful for me to say, 5 out of the 15 elders that we started with on the project have passed on. And I pay my respect to them and recognize the incredible contributions they have made to the project and to the futures of Indigenous people in their communities. I'm in awe of Aboriginal people in Central Arnhem. They live in remote areas and they live with a wide range of disasters, both human and natural. I acknowledge all the elders, past and present, and emerging, on whose land I speak. I acknowledge my Ndau ancestors too, and speak to you in the spirit of Ubuntu Abantu. I am because you are. My topic today, the future in our own hands, is a simple and unequivocal desire among Aboriginal people to have a say in how their futures are determined. Next slide, please. It's very much about recasting the conversation. Although our entry point is disaster risk management, these are bigger conversations that speak to the right to self-determination, shared responsibility, and closing the gap. The big question addressed in my presentation today is how can we make this possible? What do communities say? It's very clear to us that there are two ways of knowing and two ways of doing, the government way and the Aboriginal way. When they say, see like a brolga or a jabiru, they're talking about a brolga that flies high and sees far rather than a jabiru that flies low and sees very close by. They're advocating for a long-term planning and strategic vision. Disaster risk reduction involves a much more radical transformation in the way EM is done, a belief in a knowledge system that we very much are unfamiliar with, in institutions and practices, and even in the location of our Indigenous communities. Next slide, please. They say very loudly to me always, our ways, our ways. Why do communities say this? Why do they say, stop, listen to us, and use our ways? They're already using our ways for fire management in Arnhem Land, and they are doing so successfully. Why don't they listen to us for disaster risk management? Communities see disaster in a different way. They also think about disaster reduction in a very different way. There's no doubt that Aboriginal people have survived for thousands of years living with disasters, but they acknowledge disasters are more frequent and they're bigger. But they maintain that our ways are still a key to managing disasters and to assure safety, especially in remote communities. Our ways is used here in this presentation to include our ceremonies. These are specific ceremonies conducted by specific clan groups that have rights to those ceremonies, that have song lines and laws for those ceremonies. It is about institutions that they say are our institution, the right institutions, the right people, the right holders of knowledge, and the right hierarchy for action. They say our practices. These are suits of activities which form obligations an Aboriginal person has to manage a country and maintain a balance. These responsibilities don't disappear because one lives away from country. When country is neglected, country is sad. People suffer too. And disasters are an indication to some of an imbalance in that relationship, and it needs to be corrected. Our knowledge, elders say, is indigenous knowledge, is also experiential knowledge gained over many thousands of years, and it's Rom, the binning law, the Aboriginal law. But is there room to do anything? Next slide, please. There's some big challenges for people on country, for Aboriginal people in Northern Australia. Aboriginal people say there is no room and there is no space to do anything. What do they mean? I use the crocodile here as a metaphor because one elder used it to explain to me what he calls the Aboriginal situation. We are tied up and we can't do anything. Everything is in the hands of government. One elder even went further and said government is the disaster that we have to manage more often. If you have witnessed the capture of a male salty crocodile, you will know the following. There's a big struggle, then the death roll. There are many captors who sit on it and try to subdue it. Then the crocodile goes silent. Everything is out of its hands. When it's free again, it's in a new territory. There's a period of disorientation and it must adapt. Multiple policies of the government have made it difficult for communities to engage and participate or use their knowledge. Some elders say the conversation should not be about disaster risk reduction. It should be about less government. Why do they say this? When they talk about our ceremonies dying off, not being performed, they're talking about very often they don't get enough time to attend because job find and Centrelink constrain the time that is available for them to be on country doing ceremony. When they say our institutions are hidden from view or they are replaced by thousands of committees which lack legitimacy or which become points of conflict, they're talking about a big problem in the community. When they talk about their practices, they're talking about how it is impossible to be on country and get services on country in their homelands, so they're forced to move and stay somewhere else. They're also talking about old people dying and talking about young people rebelling against the old ways. And when they're talking about knowledge, they're talking about knowledge getting lost. But still, they say there is enough there to manage disasters. Next slide, please. What is possible to do now? We need to define clearly the parameters of engagement between communities and agencies. In this project, we've managed to come up with a set of protocols for effective management for EM agencies. These are available and I can forward them to anyone who is interested, so I won't go through the full list. Some of you may say, why do you need to come up with new protocols? They exist and many organizations have them. They do, but have they been critiqued by local communities? Local communities say what exists now and what is in use is inadequate, and they want an improvement on the existing protocols. They say that agencies do not accurately cost engagement. They rely on the convenience of participation and in ticking boxes. They say, of course, champions exist in different agencies that take engagement seriously and they try to do the right thing, but they often are also overwhelmed by the needs to engage properly and appropriately. The failure of some of the policies for disaster risk management in the Northern Territory is itself evidence that something needs to be done to improve or strengthen the engagement that exists and to re-examine the way that government engages. And we think that this project is a good example of how that can be done. Elders also say, bring back the hidden institutions and the structures. In the absence of knowledge and awareness of existing structures and protocols, EM agencies have relied very much on created structures, these committees. And as I said, they lack legitimacy and often are a source of conflict. Where EM agencies are engaging with a member of the community, in communities that have about 14 clan groups, this is clearly problematic. An inclusive structure defined through the project suggests that the EM agencies engage with at least 5 community representatives. And these are carefully chosen to represent different interest groups and different components of the clan groups. The privileging of individuals by placing them in decision-making and leadership roles that they have no cultural right to be in or a desire to play is itself also problematic for the individuals involved. It places an incredible burden on them and it alienates them from the rest of the community. The ignorance of community dynamics, interclan family dynamics, means that outside agencies persist with a model where they think an individual can represent and access all. And this is clearly not so. Outside agencies have ignored for too long the lack of alignment between their agency business and Aboriginal business on country, and we need to have a way to move the two together, and we think we found one. We need to invest in community-driven plans. But let me say this. What is a community-driven plan? Some of you may think that that is a ridiculous question, and I think you are right, but I think it is an important question to ask. The location of a meeting in a community or the presence of one or two Aboriginal fellas in a meeting does not justify the label community plan. Community plans must involve a substantial component of the community population, and it must have all representatives of the different clan groups involved. This must be a clear plan that allocates responsibilities according to the right to be in a plan and the capability of all actors to be in those plans. And we think we have achieved that with this plan that we have brought together. Unfortunately for us, we haven't really had the chance because of COVID to present this plan to the disaster risk agencies in the Northern Territory and to get feedback on what they feel about this plan. And again, there's a paper that has been written with this information, and I can forward that to anyone who wants to read more about this community-driven plan. And just as in the case of the engagement, it's really important that we recognize that engaging communities and working with them through community-driven plan requires the requisite funding and support that is required to get these plans off the ground. And capacity building on both sides is very important. Next slide, please. Here we ask the question, is change possible in our lifetime? This is a big question that some of the elders were asking me. And I was thinking, what is standing in the way? The metaphor of a shopping trolley, as narrated by one of the elders, is really important here. And it explains the question, the future in our own hands. The old lady said, and I paraphrase this, when I go into a supermarket, I go with a plan to do my shopping. I know what I want and I know how to push a trolley. Often a middleman or an outside agency, they come and they look at me and they want to help me push that trolley. Some even shop for me and not ask what I want. When I look at them, they got big smile for helping. And I say to myself, why don't they let me push my trolley and do my shopping? Of course, this is an abbreviated version, but the clear message is here. Let me do my shopping and push my trolley. We see elders talking strong for country and for their people and taking control of the trolley. And there is pushback against the government, paternalism, and this has to be strong and it has to be from all levels. There are greater demands for recognition, for trust, and there's a demand for conducive spaces for communities to be communities. There's a demand for resources to be made available so that communities can participate more effectively. The future in our own hands. When I'm on country, we exchange a lot of metaphors. They talk about shopping trolleys, brolgas, and jabiru, and I talk about African folklore and metaphors. I once told a story about the scorpion and the frog. Once upon a time, a scorpion was stranded by the banks of a flooded river. The scorpion asked for a ride. The frog hesitated. After some persuasion, he asked for assurances. He received assurances that the scorpion would not bite. Scorpion hopped on the frog's back, and as the frog swam across the river, he felt a sharp sting in his back. He cried out loudly, "Why did you sting me? Do you not realize we'll both drown?" The scorpion replied, "It's in my nature. I can't help it." When the elders stopped laughing, we noted a few things. It's not in the agency's nature to cede control to communities. They have given just enough to give the appearance of engagement. But is it working? There is no trust. There's no acknowledgement that the frog can swim. And we say it's time. The future must be in Aboriginal hands. This requires that agencies and communities change their nature. The frog recovers from the sting and starts trusting again, and the scorpion keeps its word. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bev. You've given us a huge amount to think about. There's many things I would like to explore, and I even wrote down a few questions I'd like to ask you myself, but there's been also a flurry on the chat, so I might actually go to those first. The first question that came up was actually about risk assessment processes. As I'm sure you know, there's a whole range of processes that traditional emergency management agencies use to try to understand emergency risks. And the question came through was whether you would support a separate risk assessment for Aboriginal or Indigenous values around disaster risk. You know, a separate process that allows those different perspectives, different timeframes, different ideas around what might be tolerable and what might not be tolerable, different ideas around how we might control and manage those risks. So I think, I guess there's an acknowledgement in that question that perhaps our traditional emergency risk assessment methodologies don't do this stuff particularly well. So I guess the question is, what are your thoughts around potentially a separate risk assessment process for Aboriginal communities?
I think it's very much needed because a lot of the processes that we have at the moment, they really don't include people to the degree that local people want to be included. Let me say, for example, for every disaster that we have a hierarchy of interest groups and people that are calling themselves responsible knowledge holders for that disaster. So if, for example, we're just talking about fires or cyclones, there's a clan group that owns the cyclone. They have brother-father relationships with the cyclone, and they have the song lines and the ceremonies for that cyclone. And they are the right group to lead the conversations about disaster risk reduction. What we often do is we ignore that latent structure and we go to a committee that is created by government that has one Aboriginal people that is representing a whole set of clan groups. And they ignore that clan group that has the knowledge and that have the rights to manage the disasters. And what we're saying is, let's go back to the beginning. Let's understand our communities. Let's identify the right people that we should get involved with. And once we identify them, then let's get them to the table. In fact, they say, don't get us to the table. You come to country, we sit on country, and we discuss how the process should evolve. And this is what we've tried to do in this project for cyclones, is we've said, so if the government said they didn't have money to engage with all 14 clans, what would be the best solution? And they've come up with a solution, and they've identified key individuals in the community that are able to speak with various groups, and they don't have relationships that forbid them from communicating with some groups. So that is a more inclusive structure that allows a more realistic involvement of communities in the process. So definitely we do need to put our heads together to come up with a new process and new tools that will allow that to be possible.
Thank you, Bev. That's great. Next question is around, have there been any steps taken that you're aware of to document and record the way that First Nation peoples do approach disaster risk reduction or emergencies and their connection with the land? And, you know, to document this in a way that can then be included into the training and the education institutions for more traditional parts of emergency management. So I guess the full thinking here is, perhaps, has there been a way to sort of document some of those traditional knowledge, traditional experience, and really get that into the sort of the mainstream training and education that happens within emergency management?
So there's a number of projects that I'm aware of through the Bushfire Natural Hazards and CRC that have been supported in the Northern Territory, where we've really started to talk with communities about how they want their information documented and what we should do to make this information available to agencies. One of them is a documentary that was made in Galiwinku, which talks about the relationships that communities have with cyclones. And I think it's a really brilliant piece of work, because it's, even for me, working on the communities for so long, I had not really realized how much the importance of the right people, what does it mean? And so when I watched that documentary, I began to understand how we as agencies come into communities and we can work with the wrong people and therefore not get the participation we want and not understand why. The second project that we've been involved with is this one, which I'm involved in, where we've really taken a very participatory action approach, where we've said we've identified a question and then we've developed the tool, and we've developed the tool with the community so that they become the owners of that tool. And then we've used the tool to say, let's try it out. And then you go to the agencies and you speak about your tool. So we've given ownership of the tools to the community, so they are the ones to speak with the agencies. That's the next step in the process. We haven't really done that yet because of COVID. So I'm not able to say whether that will be successful or not. And the third one is recognizing that disaster risk reduction requires leadership. And they acknowledge that they have deficiencies in the way that the leadership for disasters requires that they change many things in the way they used to do things in the old times. And so they've worked with another BNHCRC training project to develop new tools and materials for training. And that has been really fantastic work, because again, it's changed the model of training in a way that we didn't anticipate that it would. And it refocused training on clans rather than individuals. It refocused clans on whole communities. So the trainer had to really learn how to divide up his training module in a way that even young people could understand and appreciate the information that was being given. So instead of just talking about big cyclones and big fires, we started talking about the king brown and what happens when someone is bitten by a king brown. So really bringing it back to the basics. So I think tools and materials are really important, but what is also more important is for us academics and agencies to spend time on country and really begin those conversations again.
Thank you, Bev. I think this next question, I think, probably builds on beautifully from what you've just been sort of talking through. I'll read it in full, because it says, thank you, Bev, for this wonderful presentation. It'd be great to get more information, for example, the paper that you mentioned, and a few other people have commented that as well, so I'm sure that can happen. But the question is, and it builds on exactly what you're just talking about in terms of training. I'm sorry, it's just moved on my screen. Bear with me, everyone. How do you think we can develop trustful and respectful relationships between those critical agencies and governments and Indigenous communities? I think it's getting in that really at a really practical level. What can be done to build those really important relationships that give the outcomes that you're talking about?
One of the big challenges we have in the Northern Territory is that people come and go in the agencies. And for building trustful relationships, the elders really want someone who can stay, someone that they build relationships over time with. And that's something that's been really problematic. And I know that on one of my slides, I talked about champions, but I actually didn't discuss it. But these champions are people that we feel have gone the extra mile to try and really connect with communities and build strong relationships. But when they get promoted or are moved to another state, then the communities sort of go into a period of depression, in fact, because they know that the agency does not have the characteristics of that champion. And so what I've been saying to them is, let's not rely on individuals. Let's not rely on people. Let's find a way to push for agency change, for institutional reform and renewal, so that the institutions themselves can begin to adjust and find ways of working with you in a good way. And one of the big recommendations in those protocols is, number one, that the training, the cultural training that is offered for people that work in remote areas is totally inadequate. The elders want to deliver that training themselves. They want that person on country, and they want them to learn the culture, learn the composition of the communities, learn about the dynamics of the communities, learn about the laws of Aboriginal life. The fact that you and I can talk with anyone is not the same on country. We have women's business and we have men's business, and in front of that you have all this layering of relationships that prohibit you from speaking to certain segments of the community. These are real challenges when someone is engaging in a community, and a lot of the agencies, I think, they don't take enough time, or the government don't really invest enough for them to actually learn how to change that way of doing things. So the only way I think, and I know I'm sounding a bit perhaps precious, would be to go on country and really reconnect with countrymen and hear what they have to say themselves, rather than for listening to middlemen like me and taking that as what they want. And of course, communities will be different. We know there's tremendous variation in the way that different communities have requirements for different things to be done in different ways. So whereas in central Arnhem Land, I find it very easy because I've been there for a long time. When I go to Nukur or Southwest Arnhem and the Ropa Gulf, I must readjust again and relearn everything because they may do things a little different. And these are things that we don't get in textbooks. So, or that we can write about, because even after 15 years, I'm still learning.
Bev, thank you so much for those, for those very thoughtful responses to the questions. We are going to have to wrap it up here, unfortunately, but I'm sure the conversations will continue over afternoon tea.